This episode in the life of Sherlock Holmes will be transmitted to our men and women overseas by shortwave and through the worldwide facilities of the Armed Forces Radio Service. It's time for Radio on the Air. The Petri Wine Company of San Francisco, California brings you the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, the family that took the time to bring you good wine, invites you to listen to Dr. John Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his old friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And if you don't mind, I'd like to suggest something that you might share with your friends, and that something is a glass of sherry before dinner. Naturally, a glass of Petri California sherry. I say Petri sherry because it's the perfect before-dinner wine. You couldn't think of a better way to begin a meal. And Petri sherry has a beautiful dark color like dark amber. And for flavor, well, you've heard sherry described many times as having a rich, nut-like flavor. But if you want to learn for the first time what those words rich and nut-like really mean, you just taste Petri sherry. It's wonderful. Serve Petri sherry by itself or serve it with hors d'oeuvres or those little cocktail sandwiches. And incidentally, if you prefer your sherry dry, you know, not sweet, just ask your wine merchant for Petri Pale Dry Sherry. The important thing to remember is that if you want sherry, you want Petri sherry, because that means good sherry. Now let's look in on our genial friend and host, Dr. Watson, in his study.
Ah, Mr. Gunby, come in. It's quite chilly out. Here, let me take your coat and muffler, and yes, take a seat here by the fire.
Oh, well, that's certainly cozy, isn't it, Doctor?
Oh, London in winter can be rather crisp. Take some tea? Mrs. Hudson has set something up over along the sideboard. You take 2 lumps and a dash of cream, if I remember.
Ah, Dr. Watson, that would be just great. Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. Now, let's see. If I remember, last week you were telling us that today's adventure would take place in the lovely countryside of Surrey, near Kingston on the Thames.
Quite right, Mr. Gumby. Well, rather more near the ancient Abatrian lands just off the south bank. Now, let me see. Yes, here, let me look over my notes again. Of the 70-odd cases in which I have, during the last 8 years, studied the methods of my friend, Sherlock Holmes, I can say that I have found many of them tragic, some comic, a large number merely strange, but none commonplace. Late one afternoon, Holmes was sitting with me, picking at his violin.
Of course, as you know better than anyone, dear Watson, but I would fain share with anyone else. I do this much-needed work for the love of the art alone.
I should think it could make you quite wealthy indeed.
Wealth that might carry with it quite a heavy burden, I'm afraid.
How's that?
I dearly cherish my freedom to associate myself only with the most unusual, even fantastic and challenging cases.
And as it happens, of all these many cases I've logged, I cannot recall any which presented more singular features than that which was associated with that infamous Surrey family, the Roylotts of Stoke Moran. The events in question occurred in the early days of my association with Holmes, when she had just taken rooms at 221B Baker Street. That was early in April of 1883. It so happened that we'd been working until quite late one night, and Holmes had insisted I take the spare room to sleep off a slight inebriation. Well, imagine my surprise at the crack of dawn the next morning to find Sherlock Holmes standing, fully dressed, by the side of my bed. What? What is it then? A fire?
Very sorry to knock you up, Watson, but it's the common lot this morning. Mrs. Hudson has been knocked up. She retorted upon me, and I on you.
Egad, it's but 7:15. It must be the devil himself that brings you out of your usual sound sleep at this hour.
No, a client. It seems that a young lady has arrived in a considerable state of distress who must see me immediately. Mrs. Hudson tells me she is waiting now in the sitting room.
I see.
Now, when young ladies wander about the metropolis at this hour of the morning and knock sleepy people up out of their beds, I presume that it is something very pressing which they have to communicate.
I should hope so.
And should it prove to be interesting, you would, I am sure, wish to follow it from the outset.
Well, yes, of course.
I thought at any rate that I should call upon you and give you the chance.
My dear Holmes, I would not miss it for anything. I had no keener pleasure than in following Holmes in these investigations and in admiring the rapid deductions as swift as intuitions, and yet always founded on a logical basis, with which every problem was unraveled in every detail, even as it was presented. I rapidly threw on my clothes and was ready in a few minutes to accompany my friend down to the sitting room.
Good morning, madam. I would hope to inquire as to your well-being, but I see by your black veil and generally distraught condition that would be a waste of time.
You do perceive me quite correctly, I'm afraid.
Well, at least I see that Mrs. Hudson has had the good sense to light the fire and put a cup of coffee in your hand there for you.
Yes, and I do appreciate it greatly.
Well then, my name is Sherlock Holmes, and I will assist you in this...
Sorry to interrupt, Holmes, but as it happens, I know this lady, and it's quite certain that she already knows who you are.
Yes, Dr. Watson, I do indeed.
Well, you both seem to have the better of me.
Let me explain. You should remember, Holmes, that I was called to testify a couple of years ago at a coroner's inquiry in Surrey.
Yes, quite.
Well, the inquiry was into the curious circumstance of the death of this young lady's sister, Miss Julia Stoner.
Stoner. Yes, I seem to remember. Yes. Ah, this was the case involving that fellow Roylott.
Yes, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, indeed.
As I recall, you did not find him to be a particularly friendly chap.
No, absolutely not.
The coffee seems to be doing you little good, dear lady, for you still shiver from your early morning's journey.
It is not the cold which makes me shiver.
Oh, what then?
It is fear. Fear alone. It is terror.
You must not fear. We shall soon set matters right, I have no doubt. You have come in by train this morning, I see.
You know me then?
No, but I observed the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You must have started early, and yet you had a good drive in a dog cart along heavy roads before you reached the station.
I don't...
There is no mystery, my dear madam. The left arm of your jacket is spattered in mud in no less than 7 places. The marks are perfectly fresh. There is no vehicle save a dog cart which throws up mud in just that way, and only when you sit on the left-hand side of the driver.
Whatever your reasons may be, you're perfectly correct. I started from home before 6. Reached Leatherhead at 20 past and came in by the first train to Waterloo.
Just so.
I can stand this strain no longer. I shall go mad if it continues.
My dear girl, what has you so frightened?
Murder, Doctor.
Murder?
Yes, murder. I'm waiting for my own murder, and I'm terrified. I have no one, none. But I have heard of you from Mrs. Farintosh, whom you helped in her hour of sore need. It was from her that I had your address.
Farintosh. Ah, yes, I recall the case.
Oh, please, cannot you help me too? It is out of my power to reward you for your services just now, but in a month, or in 6 weeks perhaps, I shall be married, and with control of my own income.
Be assured, madam, that I shall be happy to devote the same care to your case. As to reward, you are at liberty to defray whatever expenses I may be put to at any time which suits you, but do not think that it is necessary. And now, I beg, you lay before us everything that may help us form an opinion upon this matter.
If you'll allow me, Miss Stoner, I think I can shed some light onto the situation, Holmes.
Oh, please, if you would, Doctor.
Alas, the strange circumstances of my visit 2 years ago to that inquiry near the south bank of the Thames in Surrey would seem to account for Miss Stoner's distress.
I am all attention. Watson?
Miss Stoner's stepfather, this Roylott fellow...
Dr. Grimsby Roylott. Yes, of course. A name not unfamiliar to me. Go on.
Well, he is the last survivor of one of the oldest, richest Saxon families in England.
I believe 4 successive heirs were of such a dissolute disposition that near family ruin was eventually completed during the days of the Regency.
Yes, I'm afraid that is quite true. Nothing was left save a few acres of ground and the 200-year-old house, which is itself crushed under a heavy mortgage.
Well, this Roylott is the remaining heir, and upon seeing his situation, chose to pursue a medical degree.
I believe he went out to Calcutta, where he established a rather large practice, but then something went quite sour and he lost it all.
After some robberies occurred in his household, he beat his native Bengalian butler nearly to death, and eventually was confined to a long prison term there. Upon his return, some years later, to England, he had become a morose and bitter man.
Somehow he then met and married Miss Stoner's mother.
Julia and I were twins, and we were only 2 years old when our mother remarried.
She had a considerable sum of money which she put in a trust with Roylott until such a time as her daughters should marry.
Shortly after that, my mother was killed in a railway accident near Crewe.
Dr. Roylott then took the girls to live with him at the manor in Surrey.
Our neighbours were at first overjoyed to see a Roylott of Stoke Moran back in the old family seat.
But violence of temper approaching to mania seemed to haunt the man. He had no use for the company of any of his neighbours.
I seem to remember that he preferred the company of a ragged band of gypsies and the wild animals which he brought back with him from India.
Band? Band!
Why, what is it, Miss Stoner?
Julia spoke of a band, a speckled band. They were her last words the night she died.
Interesting, very interesting.
I'm so terribly confused and so frightened. What shall I do?
See here, Miss Stoner, we'll have none of that. Rest assured, as I have told you, Watson and I are on the case now, and you have nothing to fear.
Nothing, my dear.
Now, Watson, as you were saying, what about these gypsies and these wild animals?
Well, for a reason known only to himself, Roylott chose to give these vagabonds leave to encamp on the few acres left of his bramble-covered estate.
Strange.
And just as strange is his passion for Indian animals, which he still has sent over to him periodically.
He has at this moment a cheetah and a baboon wandering freely over the grounds, which the villagers fear almost as much as my stepfather.
He was never clearly implicated in the strange death of Miss Stoner's sister Julia. Nevertheless, by the time I arrived for the inquiry, Roylott's violent reputation had, shall we say, preceded his.
I'm certain he murdered Julia, and I know he's going to kill me.
You spoke of an upcoming marriage.
Yes, and that is why I've been so afraid these last few days. It was just after Julia told us of her own engagement that she died.
Tell me more.
We have an aunt, Miss Honoria Westphale, who lives near Harrow. Julia had visited her that Christmas and met a major of the Marines, to whom she became engaged.
Ah, yes. Roylott learned of the engagement and had appeared to offer no objection. But within a fortnight of the planned wedding, the unfortunate young woman was dead.
Pray, if you now will be very precise as to details. Forgive me if I take note.
That is easy enough for me to do. Every moment of that dreadful time is seared indelibly into my memory.
Do not bother describing the house. It is clear to me that Dr. Watson and I must see it for ourselves before the day is out.
Quite so, Holmes.
On that fatal night, we had all retired, and I was sitting alone in my room. Julia joined me after a few minutes, and we chatted for some time about her approaching wedding. We knew that our stepfather had not retired to rest, for my sister mentioned that she had been troubled by the strong smell of his Indian cigars. At 11 o'clock, she rose to leave me, but she paused at the door and looked back. Tell me, Helen, have you heard lately any unusual flute music in the dead of the night? No. I suppose that I could be imagining it. The sound is so slight I can only just hear it. Perhaps. I regret to say I've not heard it. I've been disturbed at about 3 in the morning for the past few nights now. I'm a light sleeper and it awakens me. It must be those wretched gypsies in the plantation. Possibly. And yet if it were out near the lawn, I wonder that you would not also hear it. Ah, but I sleep more heavily than you. Well, it is of no great consequence at any rate. She smiled back at me and closed my door. And a few moments later, she turned the key in her own lock.
Indeed. Was it your custom always to lock yourselves in at night?
Always.
And why?
I believe Dr. Watson mentioned that our stepfather keeps a cheetah and a baboon. We did not feel secure unless our doors were locked.
Quite so. Pray, proceed with your statement.
I could not sleep that night. A vague feeling of impending misfortune was haunting me. My sister and I were twins, you will remember, and were, many subtle links which binded our two souls.
There was a wild storm that night.
Yes, it was howling outside, and the rain was crashing against the windows. Suddenly, the sounds of that gale were pierced by a terrible scream. Julia! I sprang from my bed, wrapping a shawl around me, and rushed into the corridor. As I opened my door, I seemed to hear the low sound of some vaguely familiar music, such as my sister described, and just after that, an abrupt clanging sound, as if the window shutter had been closed suddenly.
Good heavens!
As I ran down the passage, I found my sister's door to be unlocked and revolving slowly upon its ancient hinges. I stared at it, horror-stricken, not knowing what was about to issue from it. By the light of the corridor lamp, I saw my sister appear at the opening, her face blanched with terror, her hands groping for help, her whole figure swaying to and fro like that of a drunkard. I ran to her and threw my arms round her, but at that moment her knees seemed to give way and she fell to the floor. Oh my God. It was the band. The speckled band. She would fain have said more as she stabbed with her finger in the direction of our stepfather's room. But fresh convulsions seized her, and in the next moment, she died in my arms.
One moment. Are you sure about this music and the metallic sound? Could you swear to it?
That was what the county coroner asked me at the inquiry. It is my strong impression that I heard it. And yet, among the crash of the gale and the creaking of the old house, I may have been deceived.
Was your sister by any chance fully dressed?
No, she was in her nightdress.
Anything in her hands?
Well, yes. In her right hand, she held the charred stump of a match, and in her left, a matchbox.
Ah, yes, showing that she had struck a light and looked about her when the alarm took place. That is important. And what conclusions did the coroner come to?
He investigated the case with great care, for Dr. Roylett's conduct had long been notorious in the county.
But he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death.
The evidence showed that the door had been fastened upon the inner side, and the windows were blocked by old-fashioned shutters with broad iron bars, which were secured every night.
Of course.
Also, the walls were carefully sounded, and were shown to be quite solid, as was the flooring. No secret passageways or hidden closets were found. The chimney was wide, but it was stapled shut.
Yes.
Certainly the girl was quite alone when she had met her end, and there was no marks of any violence upon her.
Now, how about poison?
She was thoroughly examined for it, but without sources.
What do you think she died of, then?
Well, I shouldn't want to... I say...
It is my belief that she died of pure fear and nervous shock, though what it was that frightened her, I cannot imagine.
Were there gypsies in the plantation at the time?
Oh, yes. There are nearly always some there.
Ah, and what did you gather from this allusion to a band? A speckled band?
Sometimes I have thought that it was merely the wild talk of delirium. Sometimes that it may have referred to some band of people, perhaps these very gypsies in the plantation.
Interesting. Yes.
and perhaps the spotted handkerchiefs which so many of them wear.
These are very deep waters. Pray, go on with your narrative.
2 years have passed since then, and my life has been, until lately, lonelier than ever. A month ago, however, a dear friend of many years asked for my hand in marriage, and I have accepted. Once again, my stepfather has offered no opposition to the match, and we are to be married in the course of the spring.
Go on.
However, 2 days ago, my stepfather ordered some repairs started in the area of the west wing where my bedroom is located.
Ah.
And I have been moved into the chamber in which my sister died and must sleep in her very bed.
Oh, dear.
Imagine, then, my shock when over the last 3 nights, as I lay there consumed by her terrible fate, I've suddenly heard more clearly now in the silence of the night the same low music we just spoke of.
Just so.
To make an end of this, let me say that when it happened again last night, I could stand it no more. I sprang up and lit the lamp. Nothing was to be seen in the room, but I was too shaken to return to that bed. I dressed, and as soon as it was daylight, I slipped down, got a dog cart to the Crown Arms, and drove straight away to Leatherhead. And from there I have come to you, with the one object of seeking your advice.
You have done wisely. This is a very deep business. There are 1,000 details to know before deciding upon our course of action. Yet we have not a moment to lose. We will come to Stoke Moran later today. We must do this without the knowledge of your stepfather.
As it happens, he spoke of coming into town today. If he did, it is probable that he will not be arriving home until evening.
Excellent. You are not adverse to this trip, Watson?
Oh, by no means.
Then we shall be there. You may expect us early in the afternoon. I have myself, in the meanwhile, some small business matters to attend to.
My heart is lightened already. I'm so...
What in the name of the devil?
Good heavens, Holmes. The window!
Ah, it's your stepfather.
Oh! My God, he's followed me here.
Watson, take Miss Stoner into the laboratory and then return immediately.
As good as done, Holmes.
Miss Stoner, you will find there a door to the back stairs which will lead you out to the street. Go quickly now.
Yes, certainly. I will see you later today.
Of course. Goodbye.
A large face, seared with 1,000 wrinkles, burned yellow with the sun, and marked with every evil passion, was turned from one to another of us, while his deep-set, bile-shot eyes and his high, thin, fleshless nose gave him somewhat the resemblance to a fierce old bird of prey.
Which one of you is Holmes?
My name, sir. But you seem to have the advantage of me.
I am Dr. Grimsby Roylott of Stoke Moran.
Indeed, Doctor. Pray, take a seat.
I will do nothing of the kind. My stepdaughter has been here. I have traced her. What has she been saying to you?
It is a little cold for the time of year.
Oh, yes, a bit.
What has she been saying to you?
But I have heard that the crocuses promise well.
You put me off, do you? I know you, you scoundrel. I have heard of you before. You are Holmes.
And the aconite also.
Holmes, the meddler.
And the forsythia.
Holmes, the Scotland Yard self-appointed busybody.
Your conversation is most entertaining. When you go out, close the door behind you, for there is a distinct draught.
I will go when I've had my say. Don't you dare meddle with my affairs. I know that Miss Stoner has been here. I traced her, I say. I am a dangerous man to fall foul of. I'll have Scotland Yard on you. Look at this. I bent your poker double, and I'll do the same to you. Ha! See here.
Indeed.
I'll leave you with this. See that you keep yourself out of my grip.
He seems a very amiable person. I'm not quite so bulky, but if he had remained, I might have shown him that my grip was not so much more feeble than his own. I much prefer a straight poker, don't you, Watson?
Great Scott, Holmes! You've restored it!
Fancy his having the insolence to confound me with the official detective force. This incident gives zest to our investigation, however, and it serves to remind us that we must make haste. We do not want Miss Stoner to suffer from her imprudence in allowing this brute to trace her. Now, my dear fellow, if you will please ring up Mrs. Hudson so we can order up our breakfast, after which I shall walk down to the Doctor's Commons, where I expect to find certain information which will shed considerable light on our investigations.
Certainly, Holmes. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Gumby, I believe it's just about time for you to be mentioning your sponsor once again. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Right you are, Doctor, right you are, and that will be my pleasure. You know, at any really important dinner, you know, like when diplomats get together, you'll find wine on the table, because for years it's been a known fact that good wine makes good food taste better. Prove that to yourself tomorrow night by having your dinner together with a glass of Petri wine. And if you prefer a red wine for any meat or meat dish, try Petri California Burgundy. That rich, hearty red country Burgundy is really out of this world. Now, if you'd rather have a subtle, intriguing white wine, let's say to go with chicken or fish, try Petri California Sauterne. But Sauterne or Burgundy, to make sure it's a good wine, make sure it's Petri, won't you?